inclusiveness, and responsiveness to the needs of the global community of Internet users. I hope we can think creatively in order to bring more developing countries, governments, along with our counterparties in civil society, academia, industry, around the table on the multi-stakeholder institutions, and I hope we can grow and evolve together. And this big pink elephant, which is noted in a room, is already recognized by the multi-stakeholder ecosystem. I guess you already lost me somewhere after the first sentence, right? I'm sure that this is something you've heard a number of times. Boring speeches about multi-stakeholderism and roles of the governments and roles of others in civil society. We're not going to do that. Now, what we want to do today is to be much more practical and up to the point. Why did we organize this kind of a session where we focus on debates? To try to extract some of the main arguments in a debate within a very, very limited time. The point is to try to help ourselves understand the challenge better through very, very sharp arguments. Now, what we are going to do today is rather a theater. This is a game. We are going to enjoy it, no matter how many of us are around. And we have two teams of debaters for two topics. One will debate in favor of the motion, the other one against the motions. And the motions are related to the icon accountability and to the equal footing, so to speak. I have to make an initial disclaimer that none of the debaters today is definitely speaking in his or her own name and on his or her own behalf, let alone on behalf of the institutions they belong to, unless they say differently, right? What is the procedure for today? So we have two teams, and we have the first team, which is related to should ICANN be globalized or internationalized, i.e. should it be accountable to governments or to another stakeholder system? And we have the second topic, which is related to does respective roles of stakeholders equal to equal footing. The procedure will be like follows. We will have the first topic and the first two teams. The first team's opening arguments for 3 minutes. Then we have the questions from all of you. Very sharp and very pointed questions or comments, short ones, about the topics. Then we have the rebuttals by the teams for 2 minutes. And then we have the closing by each team for 3 minutes. At the end, you will be voting. But you won't be voting based on your beliefs in the topic, but rather based on the arguments of the teams. So which team was more persuasive? And I encourage you to write down the notes of the arguments that they are going to take, because we can discuss it at the end of the session and go into a little bit of open discussion about it. Mary, who is with me, helped building this all up. She will provide some comments and reflections on the debate afterwards, but she will also act as a timekeeper with a specific noise. Okay, so when you hear that noise, dear debaters, that means that there is 30 seconds left to finish, okay? Sounds okay? Okay, so let's move to the first debate. In the first debate, we have on one hand, Parminder from India and Tracy from Trinidad and Tobago. I'm purposely avoiding their affiliations. If they wish, they can say later on. On the other hand, we have Adil from Mauritius, and we have Desiree from UK or Serbia, whatever you prefer, Desiree. Now listen carefully to the motion. The motion for the first one is, this House believes ICANN should be accountable to governments or an intergovernmental institution. Once again, this House believes ICANN should be accountable to governments or an intergovernmental institution. We start the debate with Parminder and Tracy. You have your 3 minutes, you can start.
My name is Tracy Hackshaw, and I'm Vice Chair of ICANN's Governmental Advisory Committee. Governments are accountable to their stakeholders, their citizens, their publics, their electorate. We all pay taxes on our earnings, and fees or duties are levied for services. In return, our citizens and stakeholders expect a high quality of life, effective human development efforts, sound commercial and trading rules and regimes, reliable transport and utility infrastructure, good health care, national security, excellent service delivery, an environment which can be sustained for generations to come. Is the internet not part of this basket of expectations from our citizens, our stakeholders? All democratic elected governments were elected to serve in the public interest. The internet is increasingly being seen as a public good. Indeed, in some countries it is argued that it is to be treated as a human right, in the same way that other basic needs are treated with, such as food, water, and shelter. With this in mind, the public interest must be seen as equivalent to the protection and affirmation of basic human rights. Taking this to its logical extension, the internet, and as much as it is defined as a public good, has to be protected at all costs. The internet must be protected against any attempts to unfairly influence its operations, to limit the freedoms enshrined in the constitutions of many of the countries of the free world, against capture by forces inimical to those freedoms, against private sector interests seeking only commercial gain. As governments, we recognize and accept that ICANN currently holds the mandate for certain aspects of the growth and stability of the internet. However, we must recognize that ICANN is not bound by the principles that governments are bound to. It is a private organization incorporated by and therefore subject to the laws of the country in which it chooses to locate its head office. Is the current ICANN model and approach to accountability and transparency sufficient to ensure that it, on its own stead, can achieve this? Parminder.
Yes, I think Tracy did point to the fact that ICANN does very important work, and I would just want us to consider that why we want accountability of that work, and whom should that accountability to be. And we all agree that it should be to the public, because ICANN does important public work. So I just want you guys to think for a moment that if in our own countries somebody starts saying that the doctors, the schools, the pharma companies should be accountable to the community and not to the government or the regulators or the parliaments, then where would we be? Because there is serious matter here, and in politics it's an art of the possible. Either it's A or B, and most of the time when we say somebody should be just accountable to the community in real, effective, enforceable terms, it really means nothing, and that's no accountability. And right now the biggest problem is to ensure that ICANN works for the public interest, and we have to go by the mechanisms of public interest which are available, which could then be evolved, but having no accountability is what is accountability to the community is. Thank you.
Thank you very much for keeping up to the time and sharp arguments. The next 3 minutes go to Adil and Desiree. You may start.
Well, thank you. My name is Desiree, and I've been given this role to defend the opposite side, which means that ICANN is not solely accountable to governments. Actually, ICANN makes decisions that are in the interest of public interest, and therefore it should not just be accountable to governments. As an example, to make it more plastic, let's say that ICANN makes decisions about new generic top-level domain names, and we all know we heard about some objections, for example, from particular parts of the world for a particular application .amazon. There have been objectives saying that ICANN should not go and approve .amazon application, and that has been the case. But for example, the applicant, Amazon, could therefore go afterwards and oppose that decision and sue ICANN for having made that decision. So you see, apart from governments, there are other stakeholders involved, and it's not obvious that government should have the only say because of the complexity of the issues and interests involved in the public policy making that ICANN does. So I'm just giving you one practical example. Also, I think the second argument is that if ICANN were to be accountable only to governments, that means it will be accountable to intergovernmental organizations. And I think in this context, And that would turn also ICANN into a different kind of organization. With immunities, it would not necessarily be a bottom-up organization that it is today. And I think we here at the IGF understand all the benefits of having a multi-stakeholder working environment where the policies are made, and the benefits of ICANN staying the organization that is accountable to all stakeholders. I think I'll stop here, just not to run out of time, and pass it on to Adjel and then come back for more.
Yes, definitely. ICANN should not be accountable to government only. And taking back your own argument to counter that, yes, governments are custodians of public interest, but ICANN is even more, because in the ICANN ecosystem, you have all public interests represented. And those public interests have directly the power to influence the process instead of going through a government, which, because they are elected, think that they have a vested responsibility to take decisions for everybody, even though they are not elected by everybody. And that also prevents them generally to go and explore area where they see or they think that they are in danger in front of those who elect them specifically, but not everybody. And even in the innovation area, and me coming from developing country, I think innovation is critical for us.
Thank you, Adjel. Thank you. I think this is an excellent ground setting, and I think we have a couple of good arguments. I hope that you back there took some comments. Now it's your time to ask the questions or put the comments up. Try to be very short, and please come up with questions or comments or thoughts of your own. We can go around the table if you wish, if you feel comfortable. Any one of you? Any comment on the two sides? Try to be provoking. Yes, Johan.
First of all, my apology for just entering the room. But maybe there is an advantage, because I just heard the last bit of the argument on the other side. And what is very interesting, and my habit that whenever I'm in conference room I have to talk, I'm sorry for that, is the question of government legitimacy related to imperfection of democracy? This is because this is one issue. Let's say that we have perfectly democratic society, and the question is if democracy ensures legitimacy, which you brought, that maybe not all interests are represented through the parliament and government structures. Therefore, we have the bit broader problem of efficiency or inefficiency of democracy. And then a logical question, if there is any alternative to democracy, or should it be supplemented, or should it be on equal footing with the other types of legitimization? Therefore, this is I would say, meta issue if you zoom out. And that's I think that democracy is, as Churchill said, the best, whatever he said, but what was the famous saying, Parminder? Best among all available. Or about least worst among all available. Therefore, just zoom out perspective.
Thank you. I won't allow the four of you at the moment. We'll get back at the end of the debate to provide more inputs. Deirdre is a remote moderator. Any comments from? Do we have anyone, by the way, from the remote space?
I have Ginger on Skype. Great. But actually the remote participation isn't working at the moment. The webcast.
That's because they need a code. They need a code.
Apparently there is a difficulty at the moment about the remote participation.
Okay. Please let us know if it gets back, and if we can, if there are any questions or comments. Any other questions from the audience at this point, or comments? Anyone? Your thoughts, your arguments, or should we move on? Okay.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Yes, how would the public be represented? Who is the public?
Thank you. I hope you have noted both comments. Okay, any other comments before we move to the next 2 minutes part? That is it, okay. So we move to the rebuttals by both teams, and we again start with the to my left team. You have 2 minutes to, well, respond to either the arguments of the other side or the questions and comments from the floor. Tell me when you're ready. Okay, you can start.
Great. First of all, the argument is not that ICANN should be accountable to governments alone. We never said that. But it should be accountable to governments. I think I want to make that point very clear. And secondly, I wanted to make an observation that there is an independent report from the Harvard-Berkman study of ICANN's accountability and transparency, which has said that ICANN is in fact not accountable and has to review its accountability practices. So there is an argument on the table from an independent review that ICANN is not in fact accountable. Parminder.
I just take what Tracy said, that it's not just governments alone, and take Desiree's example, that if Amazon the company has a problem, it goes to the court, and yes, you are right, court would give the final decision, but people forget that court is a part of the government. Government has these three pillars, and they together represent the government. So at various levels, there could be different accountabilities, but in democracy, you need a backstopper, and the backstopper is the government, because in most imperfect ways, they are the representatives of people's will. And in any system, you don't have a backstopper, it becomes a free-for-all. People decide, we are the community, we are the representative groups, and that needs a set of rules. So yes, variegated responsibility, but a backstopper, and the backstopper is government, and that alone is a contention. I'd agree with Jovan that is an issue of perfecting democracy, but it's not issue of replacing democracy. And with her that, yes, the question of what is the public will is again what Jovan said, perfecting democracy, don't replace it. And right now, governments at the international level is what represents the imperfect one. Get more participation there, get more consultations. However, the backstopping work has to be done in terms of public policy by the governments, and that's where finally the accountability lies. And otherwise, an unaccountable association or body is very, very dangerous for public interest. Thank you.
Thank you. Are you ready for your side? 2 minutes? Start.
Yes, to answer the two questions and to talk about democracy imperfection, right, yes, democracy is imperfect, and that's why we are talking about this model, which is a multi-stakeholder bottom-up model, where everybody has a chance to participate, and that is a model that is being used to counter the imperfection of the democracy. The second aspect is how do you ensure public participation, and that answers the question of Parmeda about who will be the stopper at the end. It is the public. It is everybody that has that responsibility and should exercise that responsibility, not delegate that to a government. And how do we ensure effective public participation? That is through globalization. Globalization means what? It means taking ICANN process and decentralize them to the local, so to allow everybody at every country level to be able to participate and being able to make their voice heard, so that at the global level we can solve or address the issue.
Okay, you still have some time. Desiree, do you want to jump in?
Yes, maybe just to set and Churchill right in what he said that democracy is the worst form of government, expect from all the others. So I think I'd just build on to what Adiel has been saying, and I think we are not saying either that ICANN should not be accountable to governments, and you said correctly, not solely to them, but what we are here discussing is these imperfections where public policy servants are usually so remote and make so many decisions on a daily basis that having an organization such as ICANN accountable to representatives of governments who have no time to deeply get into the issues and complexity of all the stakeholders' interest would, I think, be very irresponsible. Yes, there is an accountability issue that needs to be addressed and is being addressed, but we're running out of time here. Okay, so can I continue or I'll stop?
Thank you, Desiree. Okay, we come to the end of the first debate with the closing statements of the both sides. We start with you. You have the closing 3 minutes. Okay, let us know when you're ready. So just a reminder, when Mary knocks the glass, you still have 30 seconds, okay? So just for you to know, to finish or wrap up your thought. Okay, are you ready? Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So I want to end by quoting from the European Union Commission's Principles of Internet Governance and for Accountability and Transparency that governments have. 1, governments need to be transparent. ICANN needs to be transparent. 2, government needs to participate and show inclusiveness and balance. ICANN needs to have that as well. 3, government needs to be accountable. There should be clear public commitments to give regular account to stakeholders or independent supervisory bodies. ICANN doesn't currently have that. ICANN should do that now. Without accountability and transparency, without inclusiveness, without equity and balance, what are we left with? Just a whole lot of names and numbers. Parminder.
Thank you, Tracy. I think I'll start with Adil's point of taking it to the people. Ideals and institutions and facts are different, and ideals have to be put in place and made into institution and facts because they're real lives of people which matter here. And we cannot run governments or run politics by ideals. There is no institution which has been able to take it to the people, and any institution which actually takes it to the people and also has that other aspect. Now, I digress. Accountability always needs control of coercive power. If somebody is accountable to me, if that person doesn't behave, I should be able to do something to make it behave. And this element of coercive political power is a very serious business and cannot be left hanging in the air. And you need certain clear institutions to exercise that. Therefore, we need what we have, and just throwing that anybody can do it generally gets cornered by the most powerful people, as we see the big businesses rule ICANN, rule any kind of multi-stakeholder space, because when it is open, the one with the resources comes and will dominate it, and there needs to be countervailing forces, and these are political institutionalized forces, and the ones which we have now are governments, and nobody said alone, but the backstopping is done by the government. And the allied issue is about participatory democracy, and I keep on challenging multi-stakeholderists that call a conference of all practitioners and theoreticians of participatory democracy and of multi-stakeholderism, and if any of them agrees that multi-stakeholderism is participatory democracy, I will start speaking the same language. Nobody from the participatory democracy agrees that multi-stakeholderism is participatory democracy, and if anybody has a proof, they can produce it, and the elephant in the room is big business. Big business cannot have the same power as a people's representative group, and multi-stakeholderism says big business is equal, and the equal because of which resources becomes much more bigger than the equal. And the last Desiree's point about time and knowledge, meritocracy is a very dangerous concept in democracy. Social Darwinism should be avoided, and everybody has the time who has the interest to do and has the merit to be able to participate. Thank you.
Thank you, Parminder. I wish we could continue with this. It seems like it's just warming up. Last 3 minutes to the closing for your side. You can start.
Yeah, just to say that, yes, who should be accountable to who? Who government is accountable to the user, to the public, to the end. So we come to the same thing. Why having somebody in the middle if they at the end, those who government are accountable to can directly exercise their accountability? Second thing is power. That is valid even for government. Even if coming from the developing country, I know how much more powerful an economy and big business are influencing policy in developing country because the resources are not there. So saying that, I think accountability has to be seen as something distributed. In the internet world, accountability is a distributed thing, and we have to work to strengthen that distributed bottom-up and multi-stakeholder model to ensure effective participation and accountability of everyone. And that is our challenge today, to work on how do we strengthen that multi-stakeholder by being more innovative. If I give government only accountability in 1994 when I started my first ISP, I would have never been able to do that because government were telling me, we do not have any recommendation at the ITU level that allow us to do internet. Thank you.
I'll just add a couple of things, and I think we will be definitely on the wrong track if we're trying to refine what ICANN does to be accountable to the governments, if we would be focusing on that. Because, as the question has been asked, who is the public? It is the global internet community, it is the users, it is ICANN who need to globalize and get involved and get closer to all the internet users around the world, like it has ALS chapters, like it has offices, and internationalization of ICANN itself to make it more accountable to governments would actually trigger off this really, I think, an unfortunate track of becoming a more bureaucratic institution, having needs and getting away from the internet users and their ability to participate in the process. And I think this second wave of globalization that we need to experience is actually not about a power, it's about setting norms and making everyone included in that process. And therefore, when we're reforming ICANN's accountability as a first need, I think we ought to get as close as possible to the internet users, majority of those who are currently not even involved in the process. So I think then in itself it would increase the interdependence. I think such process would increase the interdependence whilst giving focus to the nation states and giving focus to the governments may actually major a few, because that's how you get international topics and international related dependencies built. And what we're doing here is actually undoing those dependencies.
Thank you, Desiree. Okay. Thank you both teams. I enjoyed it. I took a number of notes, and I'm sure Mary did as well while counting the time. Now, before we turn to a little bit analyzing what we went through in this first part, now it's your part back there in the audience to try to vote, to help us decide which side was better in this debate. Now, whoever has been following the debate, try to reboot your brain for like 2 minutes and forget about what your personal opinion is on this topic, and tell us who do you think was more persuasive and who had better arguments in this debate. So who of you think that this team was more persuasive? Please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Okay. Who of you think that this team was more persuasive? 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You had 2 hands for both sides. Is it? No, just this one. Okay. So it's 5-5. In fact, it's draw. Wow. Okay. Is it really 10 people in the audience? Wow, that's great. Okay, excellent. Thank you. Well, it's really interesting to see. We have a comment or a question, Deirdre?
We have a vote from Tracy. A vote from Ginger for Tracy and Parminder.
So wow, so this is the team that won. Thank you, Ginger, for joining the voting.
There is some conspiracy here.
There is definitely some conspiracy. You know, when we started preparing the debate, initially we thought of firstly voting before the debates, what the positions are. But the problem it might be tricky, because that means that people actually vote on their positions, and someone might actually come and say, listen, you actually voted at the IGF. So we said, nah, okay, let's vote based on the arguments. Okay. Now, we do have time to open a short round of comments by any one of you on this debate, because not too many of us, there were not too many questions. So let's just maybe firstly give a floor to Mary. Yeah, you should go through the analysis of a debate quickly, the arguments, and then we pick up a couple of thoughts from you back there. Mary.
I'm not going to be commenting specifically on the arguments given, but more on the way in which those arguments were delivered. And I would like to second what Vlada said earlier about the propensity to have extremely long, boring speeches that are anything but engaging. And I was very, very pleased, actually, to see that there are quite a few rhetorical devices used in this morning's presentation. And I like the fact that Parminder, you actually got really involved with the audience, and you said, I want you guys to think about. And your use of personal pronouns, it was very inclusive. It was we, it was our. So bridging that gap between you and your audience was done very effectively. I think one thing I find very confusing when it comes to public speaking is that a speaker starts by saying I, and then goes to we, and then goes into you. So as a listener, I'm trying to decide what part and what position they're actually saying. So to pick to a voice and to stick through it, Stick with that voice throughout your argument is very good. Tracy, I think when you started initially, there was a fast train going somewhere that you were in danger of missing. I think above anybody, your use of content was excellent in your structure and the language that you use, but you slow down, because I find it very, very difficult to keep up with you. And I think generally, punctuation is something that we don't use well enough when we speak. We have a tendency to replace the full stop or the period, whichever part of the word you're from, with and. So instead of discrete opinions and positions, we get 6 or 7 thoughts strung together with and. And this makes it very, very difficult for an audience to actually understand what it is you're talking about. With Desiree and Adele, I thought it was much more personal, I thought, your interventions. There was a lot of references to I think, I just like to say, I just like to add. And again, if you're speaking as a team, that needs to be we, the position is. And ask yourself, really, are we interested in what we think individually as people, or are we interested in what our position is? So the use of I as a personal pronoun when you're making interventions, I don't think carries nearly as much weight as the use of phrases like the position is, the current thought on this is. So it's a much more broader and more effective assertion. The signalling from both parties was excellent. When you have a certain period of time during which you want to talk, and that time is limited, to say things like, my first thought is, the second point to make is. So use that signalling to show the audience that you have a limited number of points and you're clearly indicating to me what they are, so it makes it easier for me to follow your argument. The personal entreaties I thought were really, really good. The citing of sources, the citing of studies, it adds to references. The use of quotations is very effective and a very nice way to actually add a little bit of extra spice to an intervention. But for the most part, I would say speed of delivery, punctuation, and then being careful about which pronoun, which personal pronoun you use.
Thank you, Mary. Well, I hope this will be very helpful for all of us in future to make interventions more sharply and the arguments more sharply. Now let's go to a floor and a couple of comments. Jovan.
Just comment, I don't know if Mary was introduced. Mary Murphy is our Director of Operation, and Mary is one of the champions of Toastmaster societies and a specialist in public speaking. Mary has been following the speeches at the IGF, and she has been making comments, and she was a bit surprised with Mary. You may reflect later on the overall level of the use of rhetorical devices and speeches. And in Diplo, whenever we have the exercises, we ask Mary to sit in the room and to also give us this capacity building aspect on the rhetorics and delivery of statements.
Yes, I had read Mary's email earlier, but I just read it before I came in as well, and I saved it because I think I do tend to get passionate and carried away, and I thought before going and reading these stuff would be good for making any intervention. Thank you, Mary.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Any comments about the topics also? Any one of you? Yes, please. Or
yes,
the debate, whatever.
Okay, I thought I was a bit unhappy that this side was not a bit stronger using facts, because the argument, of course, that government represent the public is very strong. But the trouble is that only a minority of the governments we have in this world represent the public. Mm. So that argument is very easily supported by facts from the World Bank on openness and transparency. So in fact, we have a minority of countries which are transparency and open. So that's really a good argument for not relying, for not giving the accountability to governments. And I think this data is readily available. So I think aside from using so many personal interventions, it would be really good to just use facts. Thank you.
Thank you. Deirdre, do we have comments over there from remote? No? Should we move on then to the next one, which is closely related to that, and you might even have a chance to incorporate something that we went through. Now, Adil, you are leaving from this team, but please stay here. Yes, if you wish, you're most welcome. Okay, thank you. Roxanne will join Desiree on one hand, and on the other hand we have, instead of Tracy, we have Marilia, while Parminder will stay with us in this team. And the topic of the second debate, thank you Adil again, and the topic of the second debate, or the motion of the second debate is, this House believes that respective roles of stakeholders in internet governance imply their participation on equal footing. Once again, this House believes respective roles of stakeholders in internet governance imply their participation on an equal footing. Now this time we start with Roxana, who is from Romania, and Desiree, whom you already met. On the other hand, we have Parminder from India and Marilia from Brazil. We start with the team where Roxana and Desiree are. Mary, you're ready to take time? Mm-hmm. Thank you. Switch off your microphone, Mary. Thank you. Okay, the first team, you have your 3 minutes opening.
Thank you very much. The equal footing of different stakeholders as a new approach to public policy, a relatively new development, encapsulates the lessons learned throughout history. It reflects an evolution in our thinking about democratic processes, and we got to this point because we had so many problematic decision-making processes before that, in which the very few were deciding for the many. 4 main arguments support our understanding for equal footing in internet governance. Firstly, better decisions can be achieved with more diverse expertise in the room and with better checks and balances. The more people involved, the better the chances for achieving a balanced governance structure and improved accountability at the end of the day. Secondly, avoiding power concentration is a principle we should uphold no matter what. Otherwise, we risk that disproportionate contributions will be made by the most powerful. That could be the governments, the corporations, or even secret societies. If respective roles is just a legitimacy-enhancing exercise, our interests won't be represented properly by the most powerful. And what will happen to the interests of marginalized populations, for example? Who is in a position to defend their interests in the best way possible? Thirdly, we need to move from the illusion of participation to the reality of participation, and go beyond just consulting the different actors. We need to give them a voice in the process, to integrate their views, and allow and incentivize them to participate in decision making. And I think Desiree would like to add something.
Yes, I'd like to add the importance of having diversity of the use, not solely the expertise, in the process of equal footing participation, where stakeholders could be consulted on the merits of their expertise and day-to-day involvement and interest in the issues. Certainly, I think it's worth pointing out that that decisions made solely by the governments end up in not being implemented. Majority of those end up in failure because not all of the stakeholders have been consulted, and there hasn't been a process of buying in while the policies have been developed. So if they're developed with the participation of stakeholders who have participated in the process, the bigger chance of the certain decision being implemented and a higher rate of its success in the implementation.
Thank you, Desiree. Thank you, Roxana. We have then 3 minutes for the other team. You may start.
Thank you very much. The first thing that I would like to consider is that the word multi-stakeholder itself is not well defined. A sign of it is how the word has been used in different contexts and organizations, from the IGF to the ITU. When we try to apply multi-stakeholderism to areas of internet policy development, some kind of questions that we are dealing with right now is all actors should be effectively participating to call a process multi-stakeholder, or the participation of 2 or 3 stakeholder groups already means that the process is multi-stakeholder. Have we identified all relevant actors in the Tunis agenda, government, civil society, private sector, technical community, academic communities? So since the multi-stakeholder approach was not well defined in WSIS, it became highly influenced by the most important institutional innovation that emerged from WSIS, which is the IGF. And in the IGF, everybody participates effectively on equal footing, but they participate like that because the IGF is first and foremost a space for policy dialogue and not for policy making. But as the internet mirrors the complexity of the offline world, choices sometimes will need to be made between contradictory policy options. And in some topics, sometimes dialogue will lead to a decision. When this happens, we need clear criteria for representation, and we need to bear in mind the sources of legitimacy of the actors that are participating on the table. So, take, for instance, an area where decisions are effectively made today, such as technical standards. Technical standards do impact on policies. Should technical standards be discussed on equal footing? Should governments have the power to say no to a technical standard, or should the technical community take the lead in discussing and implementing and deciding what is the best technical standard? I think we need to bear in mind that equal footing, that non-equal footing does not mean that governments will take the lead all the time. It just means that in different areas of policy development, some stakeholders can take the lead, and different moments of policy development can be carried out in equal footing and others not. I think that one of the good things about multi-stakeholderism is that it is a flexible concept. So exactly what are the different roles and responsibilities is something that we need to discuss on a case-by-case basis. Adding equal footing to multi-stakeholder is unnecessary and just adds complexity to the discussions that we are having here.
I'm so happy that everybody who spoke before me has agreed that the respective roles in today's agenda meant equal footing, and there's not much for me left to say here, except for the fact that, yes, I understand your nuances, that equality of all stakeholders is equality of all people, the real stakeholders, and we shouldn't miss the wood for the trees, and the structures in front of us may not be equal, but they're always pointing to actual equality of all stakeholders, and that's what precisely was meant in Tunis agenda, which we all seem to be agreeing here. Thank you.
Thank you. Good mapping for the beginning. Then again, we move to the questions and comments about the topic. Once again, I'll read the motion so that you can remember. This House believes respective roles of stakeholders in internet governance imply their participation on an equal footing. Any comments, questions from the floor? Let me start with Deirdre. Do we have anyone online, or Ginger is still there?
Ginger is still here, but she doesn't seem to have a comment at the moment.
Thank you, Deirdre. You can also pose a comment on your own if you wish. Okay, any comments, questions, suggestions? Come on, guys, don't be shy. We have to provoke the debaters. Yes, please.
I think that the multi-stakeholder are actually defined, and there are a couple of documents relating to this, but maybe more importantly, we also can understand this multi-stakeholderism as a new form, as an emerging form of policy making, which does not only apply to internet governance, but also to climate change and a lot of other global issues where we don't have functioning decision making processes at a global scale outside the UN system. So maybe despite the IGF multi-stakeholderism not being 100% defined, we need to understand it as a new form of global policy making and live with the imperfection that it has at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Jovan?
Let me add some space. I would like two groups to reflect on what they consider as equal. This is old philosophical issue of equality discussed since time immemorial, and what does it mean to be equal?
We also have a remote comment.
This is coming in from Ginger. She says, we sometimes use multi-stakeholder as though stakeholder groups were homogeneous. We don't always take into account that stakeholder groups are very diverse within themselves.
Thank you. Any other comments from the floor? Anyone? You're so shy today. The topic is quite hot. Okay. Then we move on to 2 minutes of rebuttals. And we start with Desiree and Roxana. Two of you have 2 minutes to provide your reflections. Go ahead.
You might have noticed that in our intervention we deliberately avoided using multi-stakeholderism because there is no proper definition for it. So this ambiguity in fact allows for confusion over who should take the lead in what situation and who should have the final say on things. And we don't believe that this should be the case. The sources of legitimacy are diverse, and we argue in favor of all affected interests to be represented in the decision-making processes. On equality and what it means in this case, I think in our view, equality should be an equal opportunity to contribute to the decision-making process. Now, some people may work with this more, and others may decide to do less about it. But having this equality of opportunity at the start is very important.
Yes, I think I'd like also to comment on the comment from the audience, and I think the internet is just the beginning of this beautiful cooperation, you know, in the world, and it's therefore with its new models also changing the world, but it's also changing the institutions. It's about changing the UN as well, a long-term view, because there are other participatory processes based on democratic participatory processes within the UN that include other stakeholders, and they also participate on that equal footing. But mainly the principles, I think, is it's important that they engage people in and bring more worldwide legitimacy when you have participants that are not solely governments, they're not solely private sector, they're not solely NGOs, but working together. So it shows also, the experience shows that anyone who engage with their stakeholders and draw from a base of a community expertise are the most effective in creating the environments in which the internet access, for example.
Thank you, Desiree. The 2 minutes on your side. Start.
Yes, I think, again, I'm repeating myself, that it's evident that we are agreeing that what was meant was equality of all stakeholders, and the respective role statement is a method to ensure equality. I will be appalled by any policy process which speaks of anything less than equality of all stakeholders, equality of all people, because that's what democracy and policy making is about. And the respective roles is just a method. And there's an old tradition within policy making to ensure equality through inequality. And there is this proverbial French law which said, we treat everybody equally because the poor and the rich are equally banned from sleeping under the bridges. Now that's not equality. The equality is a discriminating treatment in many ways, and it is that sense that the respective roles are being mentioned, but the respective roles always meant that finally we want equality of all stakeholders. We should not miss the wood for the trees. Equality of stakeholders is basic. The trees is a method, and the method at different times is about respective roles and responsibilities in a forum where different people have different things, but it always means the equality of all stakeholders. And that, I think, is beyond debate that that's what Tunis agenda really meant.
Well, I totally agree that multi-stakeholderism is an emerging form of policy making, and I think that the Geneva Declaration of Principles sets down some of the most important principles for multi-stakeholder participation, which is not only openness to all those who want to be involved, but also effective outreach to make sure that those that want to participate are involved. I think none of that is being debated here. Everybody agrees that all those should be involved in the process of making decisions. I think that just we need to look in a case-by-case basis on areas of policy development and maybe on phases of policy development, and in different phases, then some stakeholders may be able to take the lead. That does not mean that these stakeholders are not accountable to the other actors anymore. If decisions are made, they need to be clear, they need to be explained, and so forth, and to make sure that all the voices that have been channeled into the process have been represented in the final decision that is made.
Thank you. So we go to the final round of comments. Desiree, Roxana, your 3 minutes of a closing statement.
Okay, so I'll start first by saying that multi-stakeholderism and those processes provide the long-term and wide legitimacy to organizations that carry out these processes. And it also empowers communities, and whether you define them as stakeholders or just participants or interested parties. So the participation on equal footing is a statement that we defend in order to give enough of diversity, to provide enough of diversity of views, to provide a more wholesome picture of the issues that are being discussed, and rather than giving privileges to a particular stakeholder group and dismissing the participation on equal footing, what the other party is arguing for.
So the question here is, do we argue in favor of power distribution or power concentration? For us, distribution will be more important. And just to end on a quote from Orwell, something we have to fear is that we are all equal, but some are more equal than others.
Can you just fit it?
Thank you. You had some more time, but you were very sure to be below that. Thank you for that. Okay, we leave the last 3 minutes for the second team. You may start.
Thank you. Yes, Roxana, we need to be equal, and I think if you judge a bit lack of energy in this debate is because all four of us seem to be speaking for equality of all stakeholders, and I think we can just build on those agreements now rather than any differences, which there doesn't seem to be much of it left. And I do understand that equality requires intermediate structures which defines things. Equality, when you start constructing an institution, you have to be unequal. The sizes of the walls cannot be equal. There would be many design principles put to it, and the respective roles are a set of design principles. They always mean equality of all stakeholders. And Jovan said what is equal is important. And here the equality is the basic equality, which is the basis of the social contract of democracy. All people are equal. The systems would evolve on the top of them, which would work in a differentiated manner, which is the respective roles and responsibility, but always with that end point in mind that all people are stakeholders. And therefore, this connector of Tunis agenda, that respective roles and responsibilities of different stakeholders implies equal footing, is a very important principle which we all are supporting here, and we need to support here. And I agree with ma'am that this kind of thinking should be taken to other areas as well, because equality, as we said, is most important. And passing on to Marelia.
I think that both teams are in agreement that participation, diversity of voices is something that we need to provide to the process. But I also think that it helps when we come down to concrete examples. So when we think about the IGF, for instance, discussions should always be held on equal footing. The IGF has a very important role in terms of problem shaping of issues. Issues are shaped here in the IGF, and they are taken for decisions elsewhere. So a lot of the steps of the policy process are already made on an equal footing. I think that what we are arguing here is that different organizations, when we take sometimes issues that are defined here in the IGF on an equal footing to other organizations such as the IETF, for instance, when you gather a topic such as mass surveillance, and then the technicians are going to gather around a topic and define what is the best technical standards that will help us protect privacy and to protect us against mass surveillance, which is something that we discuss here in the IGF, then the final decision should not be made by civil society or governments, but the final decision should be made by the technical people. Of course, the more open this process is, the more we understand the importance of technical standards, for instance, or what is the impact that a determinate standard will have in our lives. Of course, it will be better. The process will be more robust. But I do agree, and I do trust technical people to choose the last standard that is going to be implemented in order to protect privacy. The same, I feel, should be said for treaties, for instance. Oh, sorry.
Time is up.
I was looking here, and sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, we came to quite some agreements, which is not that that's not good, but we didn't expect it, but it was really good. Okay, time for all of you that have been following the discussion to tell us who do you think won this debate based on arguments and persuasion? Those that think that this team won based on arguments and persuasion, please raise your hand. 2, 3, 3. Okay. Those of you that think that this team won based on arguments and persuasion, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. What does Ginger say? She's quiet.
Ginger said neither one, they both co-opted talk over substance.
Thank you for the comment, Ginger. Okay, so we have this team winning this time, and thank you for your strong arguments. Okay, it was really fruitful debate. I'm not going through arguments, maybe a little bit later on when we maybe discuss a little bit, but I'll try to put all of these arguments that we caught up on a piece of paper and share with you, because I think this is really, really an excellent set of arguments that sharpen the discussions much more and find a place for agreements, in fact. Mary, up to you, brief reflections.
A couple of things to add to what I said earlier. What struck me about this particular debate was the use of vocal variety, the use of emphasis. Marilia, I think your change in emphasis to make your points was really effective. Also, the variety in speed, when you slow down if you want somebody to remember something, and then speed up if you want to get them really engaged in what you're talking about. Again, I would come back to the use of I think. We had one phrase that said, I think one of the good things about multi-stakeholderism is, and it would have been a lot stronger simply to say one of the good things about multi-stakeholder is that I think was unwarranted. And again, I think in our view, to simply say in our view, I think that I think is a phrase that maybe is used a little bit too much. Timing, respecting timing. One of the biggest criticisms I have of speakers at conferences like this is that they are given a limited number of time to speak that they completely ignore, because they actually believe that what they have to say is more important than the time in which they're given to say it. Another issue I have with speakers is that we seem to forget that we actually have a duty and an obligation to our audience to entertain. Now, I don't necessarily mean, and I'm certainly not saying we should all turn into stand-up comedians. It's not about amusing, it's about engaging. It's about getting your audience to come with you on your argument, and rather than just stand up and deliver your content, delivering that content in a way that actively engages the audience to listen and really hear and understand what it is you're saying. If we have a room of 20 speakers, the speaker will remember is not the one who made the best point, it's the one who best delivered the points they were making. To leave you the opening of your intervention and the closing of your intervention are the two key points. Anything in between, it's just you relating to your audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Again, we learned something about, I think, the next contributions even today of ours around the tables are going to be much better. Comments from you about the topic or about debate? Now we just opened the floor. We have some more minutes to chat a little bit, if you wish, about the arguments and about the topics. Any comments with relation to the roles of the government? For instance, what I liked personally is an interesting argument that Marilia raised in defending or going against equal roles in sense of, okay, in some parts of the decision-making process there can't be equal footing. But she didn't use the argument to support it. She didn't use the argument of governments, but of technical community. So see, it doesn't have to be only governments who needs to be on the top of others. Sometimes even technical community has to be on the top of the others. And this is what I really liked to hear, just a different argument. Yeah, Carlton.
Thank you, Carlton Samuels, for the record. I wanted to talk about equality of stakeholders in the process. We are all agreed that multi-stakeholderism presupposes that all stakeholders have equal footing in the process. But we have a slight problem with equality of opportunity. Let me give you an example. When you have a debate, and we're talking about the policy dialogue, when you have a debate and not all stakeholders are represented and in the room, that is ipso facto not equal. It is not equal for stakeholders to be out of the room in a debate. It is not equal for stakeholders to be out of the room when the policy is being developed. Remote access, as much as you want to think is equal opportunity, is not the same quality of opportunity. I have been involved in these things since 2006. When you are a volunteer in a dialogue or in a policy development process, sitting with people whose their payday, that is their work, their day job, to sit in that room, it is not equal. I can tell you for a fact. I am sitting as a volunteer, truly a volunteer. Nobody's paying me to be here. And I'm being asked to involve myself in policy development with colleagues who get paid high six figures to be in that same room. And that's their day job. Somebody is going to assess them on the outcomes of that discussion as part of their job. So I don't know how you would wish to deal with that or treat with that, but I will tell you from my experience, equality of opportunity also has to do with the quality. When you go into a room to build policy and you're not as prepared as the other person, then that is not, the outcomes are definitely not going to be one that is shaped from an equal perspective. When you are remote and you are in an area where the communications is such that people can't hear what you say or you get interrupted, then that is not equal. I have personal experience last year at Bali. I tried valiantly to integrate into a panel, and I couldn't make it into the panel, although I was up all night trying to get in because of the communications. These are absolute, these are things we know. It's not a fake. It's not outside of our experience. So I would like you to consider equality of opportunity as well as the quality that is associated in the participation. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlton. Very valuable comment. By the way, I noticed that the folks that you mentioned that are paid to do the job are paid by us, by the way. So that's also one of the problems. Why are not they doing, if they are not doing the job that we are paying them to do? Yep, Tracy.
Oh, sorry.
So I'd just like to add to what Carlton is saying and probably add the two debates together with a provocative statement. So I think it's fair to say that I could speak this out. In the GAC, there's a debate going on as to whether or not governments are in fact on equal footing. So for those who don't know, in the ICANN rubric, there are supporting organizations which make policy and advisory committees which advise on policy after it's been formulated. The governments have recently, or maybe not recently, been saying that an advisory committee is not on equal footing as a supporting organization, and therefore in a multi-stakeholder model, they are not on equal footing in the ICANN world. How do you reconcile, from a government perspective, and others who are, I believe, at large, would also qualify in that category as advisory, that they are not involved in the same way as the policymakers, in spite of the efforts to do early engagement and all those other things? At the end of the day, it's said that the advisory committees have veto power, which is not really true. However, what is the response to something along the lines of governments having equal footing in the ICANN discussion, in which case the accountability argument may not be as necessary in that standpoint? That's been some of the discussions we've been having in the GAC, and in the absence of that equal footing discussion, the accountability argument has come up more often because of that lack of participation. Thank you.
I think Carlton raised the most important question at the paradigmatic basic level. Equality within the room and equality outside the room are two different things. And basic concept of political equality is the equality outside of the room, equality among people, and that's basic, and everybody agrees. And the question then is that the equality outside the room, how does it convert to equality inside the room? And that's not a small question. That's the very question of democracy, not to be treated lightly. And the problem with multi-stakeholderism is that it does treat it lightly. It says who's present have made it, and they are equal. And we have heard that presence is mediated by a huge number of facts, and multi-stakeholderism consistently refuses to look into those facts, factor them in, and create filters to counter those facts. And until that is done, the equality inside the room is a huge inequality for those outside the room. And that basic proposition is a problem. The equality of what is happening inside the room has to represent an equality outside of the room. And therefore, since it will be always 0.000001% inside the room, how much equality of opportunity you do, the room cannot fill in with 7 billion people. Representativity is the basic question. Multi-stakeholderism hates that word. You can go and do a check of the documents of multi-stakeholderism. If you don't believe that they hate that word, you wouldn't find that once in 1,000 words. While democracy is wholly based on converting outside equality to inside through representativity into quality, and that's the basic problem with multi-stakeholderism. And closing it with the point you made, and I think this anti-governmentalism which upper middle class, because of their economic interests and cash in their pockets through which they can manage their business, is a huge problem, because we very easily talk about democracy is not working, governments don't work as big businesses work. And I don't agree with all those reports who say that a very small minority of the world's governments are democratic. I know the extent of democracy in the developing countries. I know it in India, I know it in Dhaka, I know it in Nepal. There are struggles, but there's a huge degree of democracy in many, many places. And I don't think it's less than 50% in this world today. And that is a better thing. And we always have to compare A versus B. That's less democratic, but the other side is the big business. And how democratic the big business is. And between A and B, what do we choose? And imperfect representativity should not be thrown away because of its imperfection, because then we go towards models which are hugely, hugely unequal. And representativity, therefore, should remain the basic question for all of us.
Thank you. Deirdre?
I have two sets of points. One from Ginger first. She says she much appreciates Carlton's point about unequal footing of both volunteers and remote participation, and suggests that the next debate might be, is there equal footing for remote participants? Should there be equal footing for remote participants? Some don't think so. That's Ginger. The next one is me. Can I? Carlton's example, in fact, he did get to speak on that panel because I was in the room and we were in contact on Skype, so he gave me the words and I gave the words a voice. I believe that's what we have to start doing. We have to start helping each other. We have to start working around the technology. If the technology lets you down, you need a plan B. This was plan B for Ginger today until the WebEx began to work. I also think that, I agree, I think, with Parminder, the stakeholder, the idea of stakeholder is divisive because it separates people into one group and one group and one group where they may in fact have sympathies in several groups. So I think that we, us as individuals, need to create our own democracy by offering hands and pulling each other in. We can do it. I think that's how we're going to have to do it, rather than depend on groups doing it for us. That's not very articulate or well argued, but I know what I mean.
Thank you, Deirdre. Quickly getting back to what Carlton said about the quality. So it's not only the equality out of the room and equality in the room, but it's also the quality in the room and quality out of the room, because if we miss the quality of contributions in the room or out of the room, we just didn't do anything, right? Johan.
I rarely disagree with Ginger, but today we are in debating mode. And I'll give you one example on discussion of remote versus in-situ participation. We had an event in Geneva, and we opened it for remote participation. People came to the room and said, it's not equal treatment of us. We made an effort to come to the room, to the event, and you want to treat us. We try really to treat equally, to do in vivo experiment. Remote participants and in-situ participants. And one of the comments on the in-situ participants, listen, these guys are sitting in their offices and we made an effort, we are here in the room, we want to be treated better than just equally with remote participants. Just one idea. Second point, which is extremely interesting, and I think this debate is, well, I attended a few sessions, but I found really marshalling of arguments extremely important. We have to address some problems immediately, and probably one way to sort out this problem, what Parminder said, equality outside the room, inside the room, equal opportunity to participate, is to have really full transparency, but genuine transparency of processes, and to start in building check and balances very fast. Because check and balances in this process till we create the ideal design or close to ideal design are extremely important. Because we have to sort it out, these problems now. Decisions are, even during IGF, some decisions are proposed on the basis of multi-stakeholderism, and we have to see how this check and balances, because there are strange things. I attended one event where all panelists had twice salary, according to public information, than Diplo's annual budget. And I said, my God, that's something, there is a sort of instability in the room, you know, you say, what's going on? And for these situations, you have very good rules in Washington, D.C., in Brussels now on lobbying. Lobbying is legitimate exercise, but then lobbying involves certain rules and procedures, check and balances, conflict of interest, and other things. Therefore, probably to address this complete disbalances, we have to start with full transparency and in building check and balances. And move from the general rhetorics. Well, in this case, rhetoric is not very used in negative way. I'm just, but move to concrete issues and concrete problems.
Thank you. I see you, Des, you wanted to jump in, right? Or not? But before that, I just wanted to see if, is it Ginger back there? Probably she wants to respond to Jovan, so yeah.
She says, Jovan illustrated my point. There are those who believe remote participants should not have equal footing. Are they right? Is it so easy for me, that is Ginger, to be up at 1 a.m. to join you today? I'll take you on, Jovan.
Thank you, Ginger. Everyone puts the effort, seems like. Parminder, yes?
Yeah, I mean, whatever may be the correct position between the two, but we agree that equality often has to be ensured through inequality. I mean, this equality cannot be used for your own purposes, which multi-stakeholderism sometimes use. Basic equality as the highest value remains the biggest issue, and we should always be checking. And about checks and balances, and I saying let's go beyond rhetoric. And I think transparency and checks and balances itself has become really a rhetoric. In the problem with multi-stakeholderism is that they don't want rules, and they don't want any remote arm's length accountability. These groups say that we are the community. That's the biggest misappropriation of a term for many, many centuries. When the people who decide things also declare themselves the community, because then they abolish accountability. It always works where somebody else at a distance, whether it's a court or some uninterested party who can say, excuse me, as per these rules, what's your problem? But multi-stakeholderism says, we will decide, we will be accountable to ourselves. We know the charade which is being played about ICANN's accountability right now, that no, we will decide, we will not have rules about transparency, conflict of interest. Civil society involved in these spaces says they don't want to tell you their financial disclosures. I mean, I've never heard of that kind of a thing in any other civil society. So this group is completely anti-checks and balances and transparency, and that's the issue. We need rules-based accountability and separation of powers. Separation of powers is something which this group doesn't believe in, and these are the huge problems with the multi-stakeholder evolving system, which has to get diversified.
Thank you. We have a couple of more minutes. Anyone wants to put some of the final comments? Jovan, yes?
Let me monopolize. Vlada, I will discuss the Ginger's comments. Well, I felt a bit ashamed after she said that she had to wake up at 1 o'clock in the morning. Well, bye-bye, Ginger. Vlada, you're a member of the MAG, and one practical issue, what Mary indicated, give the scanning of the rhetorical level of the IGF. Is there any possibility to do capacity building? IGF is about capacity building, sometimes vaguely indicated. Also on the quality of discussion. I don't know how to do it, but you may propose it as a member of the MAG. Second, to have this type of discussions more frequently in the IGF activities. I don't know how that can be structured, because this was more academic exercise and free exercise. When it comes to the workshops, it's probably more challenging to have opposing views than that. But is there any way to increase the quality of discussion at the IGF? Because we have this inflation of the workshops. Analysis, the analysis of our transcripts doesn't show high level of discussion, marshalling the same arguments, and that could be, this could be two ideas. I don't have a concrete proposal, but you may open this issue during the next meeting of MAG.
Thank you. It's probably multiplying Mary into thousands of copies and putting her at every single panel to comment after every single panelist. I think that could seriously help. No, I'm joking, but
let me disclose my interest. Obviously, I want to give Mary some consultancy at the IGF. joking for transcript. Yes, that's it.
No, it's a serious suggestion, and I totally agree. I think we did a lot of improvements from the early years of IGF, at least with the format of sessions, and now we see many more open sessions, and even the seating is better, but you're totally right. I mean, the discussions, if we go probably through the transcripts, it will be the same level?
Adi, I wanted not to come back, having intervened a lot of times, but I have to comment on the quality of the discussion. Capacity is not the real problem. When medicines are being discussed, when water is being discussed, the right people reach there, not the right arguments, but the best arguments, because they are the people who are getting affected, and they say the tap water is an issue like this. The problem is IGF refuses to discuss what all the rest of the world is discussing in the name of internet governance. The problem of the right to be forgotten, where names are being removed, whether it is a violation of freedom of expression or it is a violation of privacy, whether courts are asking from one jurisdiction to other. The construction of the debate has to be on what the newspapers and the people on the street are talking about internet governance, and that conversion rate is extremely poor, and that reduces the quality of the discussion. And I think capacity building and policy dialogue spaces should be kept separate, because this feeling that, a person is coming to a debate, knows what they want to do. And if they strongly feel about it, they would do it. We need capacity building outside. But it's not that you come to the IGF and then you're told that what kind of things you should discuss. that's not the right real participation into the IGF. And people would be coming with the right issues if the agenda was people are discussing.
Could I? Let me just reply to Parminder. Conceptually speaking, yes, they should be separate, but in reality, Diplo's experience over the last 15 years is that sometimes the question where to enter the UN Palais in Geneva, how to speak, how to intervene, hand-holding, giving people push, support, encourage them to speak. This has been a mission of Diplo for the last 15 years, and I'm very proud that there are quite a few members of MAG and GAC from Diplo's broader community. But sometimes this element of capacity building is important, and I would say even complete capacity, not just the course or training or this and that, but even encouragement and small support, facilitation, giving the people encouragement to be part of the process. On that level, this general binary distinction, which I agree about, in reality moves into the more subtle interplay.
Thank you. Well, I think both of you are quite right, because you're talking about different levels. One is knowing the topic, the thematic area. One is knowing how to present it and how to communicate and where to communicate. And the third one is making a chance and organize the session in such a way that people can really contribute with what they want to. So those are all the levels which do not confront each other, but rather go hand in hand, right? Okay, well, thank you for coming today. I think we had a really fruitful discussion. One interesting thing that I noted is that I forgot as a moderator, and that's my fault, and I apologize to transcribers. I didn't mention any single name or surname. I didn't even introduce myself. But that means at the end that the transcripts are going to be Chatham House, which is not that bad. So thank you for coming, and I hope you enjoyed the session. We'll go on discussing, well, with coffee. Thank you.